It's the Jack and Joe Show. Welcome to the podcast, the YouTube show, and Joe Sansom alongside me. We have a lot to talk about today. It's the end of the season. It felt like yesterday we were talking about Manchester United away. Now we've played 38 Premier League games. We finished 11th, 54 goals scored, 54 goals conceded, 54 points on the table. The record points tally for Fulham this season in the Premier League. Joe, how are you?
I'm all good. Yeah, no, you're right. Time really has flown because it doesn't feel like long ago at all that we were previewing this season or even just reviewing last season or looking ahead. And now it feels a little bit like Groundhog Day in a few of the topics that we're going to talk about and ways that the Fulham can improve. I mean, let's start off, Jack, by saying it's been a good season. I think that we need to quickly put ourselves in the headspace of last summer and what we were expecting. And we need to remember that we'd lost Polinia. And we'd lost, our star man, who was so integral to the way we played. And we were a little bit nervy. I mean, I wouldn't say that anyone in the Fulham fan base was predicting a relegation or anything that drastic, but we certainly thought it was going to be a bit of a slog. And we go into that Man United game, and, who have we signed? We signed Sessegnon, who is not quite fit enough to start. We've signed Cuenca, who's not involved in the first team. We've signed Smith Rowe, who's just about fit enough to start, but not fit enough yet to complete 90 minutes. And we're thinking, okay, where's our Polinia replacement? Where's our striker? Where's our new centre-back to replace Tosin? Where's our new winger to replace Willian? I remember being really nervous. So for all the frustration and things that we have had at some parts of this season, which we will come on to talk about now, I think it's important to preface it by saying it has been a good season and we have broken our record points tally, and Silva's already said that that's what we need to try and do again next season. But it's certainly a more positive season than I expected going into it.
Yeah, I think the overriding feeling was in the final 4-5 games that Fulham have tailed off, and Europe isn't a possibility. Whatever would have happened in terms of if Fulham were to finish of 8th, they wouldn't have got Europe anyway. So I suppose that's something to feel slightly better about. But look, the whole season has been fantastic. I can think off the top of my head at least 10 games that was some of the best Fulham games I've been to in a long time. Lots of famous results, lots of big results, lots of derby wins and last minute winners, and in this current climate, and I've said this for weeks now, in this current climate where we're seeing the last 2 seasons where 3 go up and 3 go down, to have escaped that trap with Forest and with Bournemouth and seen all 3 of those teams surpass all expectations in the Premier League is incredibly impressive. And obviously, there are question marks over all those points dropped from winning positions, of course, and that's something we need to look at the summer, and that's something we need to improve on. But the overriding feeling I've had coming out of the ground after Manchester City at home on Sunday was, wow, that was a really fun season, and I thought that was just a really excellent season to support Fulham. More good memories than bad. And now, Joe, we have that sort of difficult situation where we're waiting for retained and released. We're going to be waiting, and there's no Fulham, and you have to sort of, you're trying to find some news out of places like Twitter, and you're basically, it's nice to have a break from football. Don't get me wrong, but we need those dopamine hits of bombers, and we need
Absolutely.
those serotonin.
David Ornstein, it's time to earn your money, essentially, is what Jack's saying.
Let's just, before we get into summer, let's just give your overriding thoughts on the 38 games, the FA Cup run, the cup runs that we had, because, some outstanding games. Chelsea away, Brentford at home, Spurs at home, Liverpool at home, like Newcastle away, some really good stuff. Forest away was really, really fun. Wolves away was very, very fun. Give me your thoughts and your highlights.
Sure. I mean, let's start first half of the season. Let's just go up to the end of 2020, 2024 for the sake of this. Unbelievable. Fantastic. Not just the results that we were getting, but the football that we were playing. I think that is where we peaked. I don't think that is doing a disservice to the second half of the season or any of the players or the manager, but that was where we peaked. That was where we had the majority of our best moments and best games. There were just so many stages that I remember speaking to you and speaking to other friends, to my dad, to whoever, just saying, even when we dropped points, we were the better team. And I felt like that was a continuing trend. And there were very many times when we were comparing ourselves to Bournemouth and to Nottingham Forest, who are both riding much higher in the league at that point, and saying, that should be us. We haven't got what we deserved. I think it's important to remember that we were really very dominant in most games. And we went on that 9-game unbeaten run heading into, I think it was mid-January when we lost to West Ham. Too many draws in there, but ultimately we were very, very hard to beat. And I think then something changed. And I think it was the mentality of, we're drawing too many games. Let's go for it. And you can see that after that Ipswich game, first game of the new year, apart from Man United in the Cup in 90 minutes, we didn't draw another game.
Yeah.
It's insane. A lot of last minute wins and defeats in there.
It made us more inconsistent, because if you look at the timeline of results on flash scores or whatever, when you see the colours of the results, seeing like win, loss, win, loss, win, loss, it just screams inconsistency. But actually cutting out those draws were very, very important. But at the same time, we were losing many more games than we were in the first half of the season.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. We lost too many games. The overall idea I got, because I felt like we went, I don't know, I felt like we were less pragmatic second half of the season. I feel like there were some games earlier on. I think the Arsenal game was a great example in December, where the setup was fantastic, the defensive setup that we had. Another game where we did take the lead, but I think that we could sort of, based on the balance of play in that game, we can sort of go, okay, fair enough. Arsenal had the majority of the ball, didn't create a lot with it, but it was very much the onus was on them to get back into it, and a point was a great result. First half of the season, so many fantastic performances from individual players throughout. I mean, Iwobi was probably the star of the show for the first half of the season, I would say. It looked dead set to get player of the season. We'll probably go through who we think later. But I think he was played into the ground a little bit by lack of options. Lukic was also a revelation. I don't think anyone expected him to be this good this season. And Anthony Robinson was playing the best football of his career, in my opinion, in that first half of the season. I think that the two moments of the season also happened first half of the season in the two late wins, Chelsea, obviously, and then the Brentford comeback with the two Wilson goals. But Jack, I think that something changed in January, really. I think that's where things started going, not wrong, but stopped going right, when everything was going in the right direction. And I think it was the transfer business that we had compared to some of the teams around us. And, this isn't new news. I think that the higher ups at Fulham will hopefully realise this and see that we had a big opportunity. I'm not just talking about the league here, but the cup as well, where we needed a little bit more attacking impetus, a little bit more depth, a bit more individual brilliance. It's really ironic that we speak about individual brilliance now as something we need, where under Scott Parker, that was basically the only thing that we did have. And we were almost going, someone will bail us out, but we don't have a game plan. Now we've got a great game plan, but if it doesn't work, we don't have anyone to bail us out. So I think that's where it started. And, a lot of people's recent thoughts on Fulham will be those of frustration and, what could have been. It is important, like you say, to remember that 8th wouldn't have got Europe, but at the same time, it does frustrate me that 8th would have been a fantastic finishing position in the Premier League anyway. And, it was in our hands going into mid-April. So that does frustrate me, but there's still some fantastic moments in the second half of the season. I don't think the football we played was anywhere near as good. I think that's one thing to point out. I think that a lot of the results we got were less deserved than they were first half of the season. But I still thought that we were a very good team. It's just that I think that the first half of the season under Silva was the best we've been since he took over, especially when you marry up, the opposition we're playing. Ultimately, been a good season. Those would be my main thoughts on it, though, Jack, in terms of there's so much that we can improve. And I think that a lot of them are just ways through squad depth. And, we struggled a lot with those injuries that we got heading into the new year. Reece Nelson was very unfortunate to be basically ruled out for the entire second half of the season. Anderson hasn't been the same since his knock. Tete was injured for quite some time. Castagna is then playing with an injury. So is Robinson. We've seen he's just had surgery. Harrison Reed, Muniz. Yeah, thank you, Silver, for lying. There's just been so many. I've probably forgotten a few there as well. But
Lukic's yellow cards, suspension.
Lukic's, oh my goodness me. I mean, thank goodness he didn't get to 15 because that would have been a 3-game ban going into next season, which would have been horrendous. The other thing I would say, Jack, before I hand over to you, is that in that second half of the season, we did have that cup run. And I know we only got to the quarterfinal, but it was exciting. And it was something that the whole sort of club got behind. And I still look back at the biggest frustration of the whole season is without a doubt that quarterfinal. And the reason for that is not just the result, but it's the fact that for the first half an hour, I thought we were by far and away the better team, but didn't take our chances. And if we could replay that game tomorrow and we take one of those chances, who knows what would have happened? Palace are a very different team when they go behind versus when they take the lead. They're fantastic for holding on to a lead. That's perfect for their setup. They're wonderful on the break, and they can just pick you off for those second and third goals. But we collapsed after 1-0, didn't we, really? And such a shame, because that really, even if you remove the implications of 8th, it just culled our entire momentum that we were starting to build up again. We'd had the good results against Forest, we'd had them against Wolves, against Tottenham, the cup win at Old Trafford. It was starting to go a bit more back in our favour. And I felt like that just sort of put us back down to earth a bit, and everyone sort of had to stop dreaming. But a great season, and one that I thoroughly enjoyed. It was just a shame that the run of results at the end happened when they did, because it's taken the shine off it. But yeah, those are my thoughts.
It's interesting because you mentioned the FA Cup game, and it does feel that, for me, sucked all the life out of the season in the space of, I want to say, 5 minutes, and they scored 2 goals in 2 minutes, or basically 2 goals in a few minutes, and then obviously the third in the second half. So after the FA Cup defeat to Crystal Palace, we only won 3 of 9 league games. All the rest was 6 defeats, and it did feel like, the life was sucked out of the season for a little bit of time. Obviously, we lost to Arsenal. We then beat Liverpool, which obviously was a great result, especially considering we were from behind from early on. Lost to Bournemouth in really poor fashion. Lost to Chelsea in the last minute. Beat Southampton just. Lost to Villa in incredibly poor fashion. And then obviously the Villa game. Sorry, not the Villa game. The Everton game. And then beat Brentford and then lost to Manchester City. So, the recency bias is something that's so prominent in our game these days, where a lot of the fans, I would argue that the overriding emotion from Fulham fans at the moment, or in the last couple of weeks, is one of major disappointment, because within the last few months it has been disappointing the way that Fulham have tailed off. But when I was sat in the press conference, the last one of the season, knowing this is the last chance to speak to Marco, I don't think ever, because I think he's going to stay, and I think he made that fairly obvious, which is a huge weight off the shoulders and a huge sigh of relief. It felt as if, I basically said to him, you wanted to finish in the top 10, you haven't, but surely you look back on this season as incredibly positive, and he did. I think there's so much to be positive about, and I think there's so much work to do. There's a load of work to do this summer, and obviously we know Fulham's history, like in transfer markets. I just really hope that, all the times that Silver said he's been meeting with the board, they've been planning it since January. Okay, great. Now the season's over. Let's go out and do our business. I obviously, you mentioned the January market, and you look at Villa's January market compared to Fulham's, and that's the reason why they maybe should have got Champions League football. Obviously, they were quite unlucky on final day, but their intentions were clear, and ours, obviously, he mentioned budget, and he mentioned maybe there was a lack of a budget that we could have spent in January, but with a fresh sort of summer to come, I'm expecting Fulham to spend big, and I think Fulham should spend big. In this current climate of Premier League, where it's probably one of the most weirdest seasons ever, with two of the top six finishing in the bottom half, Forest and Bournemouth and Brighton. As for Brighton, are always very, very good, but flying high. I mean, my worry is that going into next season, we have to really up our game because everyone else is going to up their game. Everyone else is going to get better. Yes, there are a lot of teams in European football, and that's obviously going to play into fatigue and stuff like that. And obviously, we're not a team that has to worry about that because we're going to be playing 38 games plus cups, whereas a lot more teams are going to be playing, lots of Champions League and Europa League, Conference League games. However, those teams in those positions are going to attract a better quality of player because those players are going to want to play in European competition. So we've really got to solidify our targets, go and get those targets, not overspend, but also spend a good amount. And Joe, I know you tweeted the other day about what you want first through the door. But just before that, Kenny Tete and Tom Cairney, we believe are the two players who we're sort of trying to get new deals for. I definitely think Willian and Vinicius are off. It seems that way. I think that's a sensible decision. So first thoughts on TC, because obviously with the club not really announcing anything, so it's all very up in the air. And I thought that was quite disappointing, the fact that TC he got a send off as such, but everyone was like, well, is it not his last game? Is it? And with Kenny, it was more of a, he gave an interview after the game with the club saying he wants like many more years so hopefully we can sign the contract. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts have definitely changed over the last few months, because to be honest, a couple of months ago I would have been very much open to TC going. This summer I think it would have been time. This sounds bad. I'd still caveat it by saying I do think that if we released him, it wouldn't be the end of the world. I would be far more disappointed from a personal level in terms of him being a club legend than I would in terms of what I think he will offer us next season. But he's the club captain. He's been here for so long. He's been basically the cornerstone of everything good Fulham have done over the past 10 years. I think that he deserved more than what he got the other day in terms of everything being set in stone. But that being said, if they're still in talks, they're still in talks. If they haven't agreed something, what I do like the fact that they are still in talks. The talks haven't ended, so there's clearly a desire from Fulham to keep him if they think it's right. And the same for Cairney. There's other offers, like we saw that news story about Wrexham. He's probably thinking, if I stay one more year at Fulham, what do I do next season? So it'll probably only be a 1-year contract. It feels like maybe 2 at the most. I would like him to stay. I think that you saw on the weekend that he can still control midfield, and that was against a fantastic City midfield. And he can also pop up with a goal, as we saw against Brentford. And to be honest with you, those are the things that I didn't think he could do anymore. I thought that he was past it at this level, and I think the other day proved that he can still offer something. And I would love, the Brentford game showed that as well in the second half, probably even more so. He ran the show there. And I would think it would be good to extend. And when he does leave the club eventually, even though I'd love him to retire here, I hope that we do the send-off properly. As for Tete, I feel, to be honest, more strongly about this one, because I think this matters more in terms of our immediate future as a club, in terms of he's a right back that will start for us next season. We don't need to replace him. He could probably start for us for a few more seasons. He's of a very high quality. Defensively, I don't think there's many better in the Premier League. I think that he's lost a little bit of his attacking impetus since his injury, but hopefully that will come back after a pre-season. But I think it would be a massive shame. I think we saw the drop-off with Castagne, with no disrespect to him. And I know that he was playing with an injury as well. But I think that we saw how important Tete is to us in that right-back spot, and has been an important part for a while. I think we can make our lives quite a lot easier by just extending them both. And there's immediately 2 holes that don't need to be filled. One of them being depth in midfield, with a midfield that we probably know is going to need more depth, because Harrison, Reed, Pereira, there's question marks about all of these players. As for Tete, obviously that means that the right back position is basically sorted. Don't have to touch it. Him and Castagne is good enough, in my opinion. The 2 that I said that we need into the door, I'd love to hear your opinion, Jack,
Yeah.
And that's not saying that these are the only two players that we should sign, but I think that these are two that we should sign to immediately come into our starting 11 from the start of next season. Is a marquee winger, and now by that sounds quite vague. What I mean is,
Shirky.
yeah, a goal scoring winger. We lack our version of Bowen or Anthony Gordon or Mitoma or Mbeumo from Brentford.
Absolutely.
We or even Semenyo, we
Barnes.
lack that player. Half Barnes, there you go. He's probably available, actually. We lack our version of that player that can get consistent goals from the wing and is a potent threat throughout. We lack that completely. I think that if we're being honest, it should probably be the right side that we focus on first. We've got less of a solidified option there. There's various players that can play there, but I feel like Iwobi on the left is slightly more settled. If I'm being really fussy, I think we could do with that sort of player on both sides. But I think for the time being, let's focus on getting one through the door first. Who knows if someone like Chukwueze could be that player? I know we were linked in January. Who knows? The other one I think would be a goal-scoring midfielder. And by this, I don't necessarily mean an attacking midfielder, but I do mean a midfielder that can actually score a goal. Lukic and Berger are great at what they do. What they're not great at is any sort of goals or assists, really. I think Lukic has got 2 this season. Berger's got none. I know the roles they play aren't defined by that. But oh my goodness, it really lets us down in terms of when the strikers aren't scoring, when the wingers aren't providing. To have some threat from midfield would be wonderful. And I think that going into next season, really it has to be Lukic or Berger and a more advanced player next to them who can offer a goal threat. The example that I'll give is McTominay, because last season we were linked with him, and someone that crashes the box.
He crashed the box and won them the league the other night.
Yeah.
He just scored a little scorpion kick and won Napoli the Serie A. I mean, the trajectory of Scott McTominay. You talk about Man United, where it's like a graveyard, and then they go off and spread their wings, and they're absolutely fantastic. Yeah. Joe Willock.
I'm not against Joe Willock, but I've got to say I don't think he's much of an upgrade right now. I think he had a wonderful patch of form a couple of years ago when we went down in lockdown. And other than that, I don't think he's ever been a consistent goal scorer in his career, really. I think that he's done, that too. I think he's done well for Newcastle. I think that for the price that it would probably cost to get him out of there, I don't know if that's the best use of our money. But I do agree that we could be looking for players that are falling out of favour at their current clubs again, like a Smith Rowe last season. I know it hasn't worked out yet. Hopefully it will, where they are someone that the technical level of them is very high. I think the technical level of our team overall is quite low. I think that physically we're pretty good. We're pretty strong. And if we can add some technical players that are basically a level above what we've got right now, because right now we've got a team where if they're not on it, we'd probably lose. And we weren't off it much first half of the season, and we didn't lose much. Second half season, we were off it a lot. In that run of games you mentioned before, those final 9, I mean, obviously we were great against Liverpool. And then I thought that we were good in the second half against Brentford. And I thought we were decent against Man City. But every other game, poor.
I agree with you in terms of goal scoring winner. Essential, absolutely essential to any success of any Premier League team. You've mentioned so many examples. Elanga, another one. Hudson-Odoi, another one. You think of every team that probably finished above us this season, you can name goal scoring wingers in their team. And of course, you could say, well, Nelson could have been that guy, and Wilson had injuries and blah, blah. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, something looking forward, going forward, that's what we need. Absolutely. Another midfielder to compete with, I'd argue 2 midfielders to compete with Lukic and Berger. Like you say, more players who can score goals, who can box crash, or crash the box, I should say. I'm now of the opinion that if Pereira leaves, the second number 10 spot should be Josh King's. If we want to make him happy, if we want him to develop at the club, to sell Pereira for 25 million, maybe, let's just say 20 million, 25 million, and we'll reinvest that money elsewhere on the pitch and give an academy prospect who's probably, I would say that Josh King looks as good now as Fabio did when he first came through, maybe even better, it would be crazy to shun him away and be like, oh, you'll be third choice, or Josh King has got to be in the matchday squad every single week next season, getting minutes, starting games here and there, competing with Smith Rowe. That's if Pereira leaves. If Pereira doesn't leave and we've still got him and Smith Rowe, Josh King should still be in the conversation for the midfield places and even those number 10 places as well, because he can play as a number 8, he can play as a number 10. So that's midfield. So I think we should bring in 2, and obviously that I think we should caveat that with the fact that I think that if TC leaves, if Harrison Reed leaves, if Pereira leaves, I think we might need another left back to compete. I think Sessegnon. I think I'm more keen just to push Sessegnon a little bit further forward, have someone competing with Robinson, not like, I suppose, like a Balotore, would you say? Obviously Tete, sign him on to a new contract, compete him with Castagna. I also think we should maybe look at the situation with Walker Peters, but I think that he's probably going to be bound to go to a club in Europe. I think he's that good. I do not want us to sign Soufal. I think that would be a ridiculous decision. And the other couple is upgrading on Steven Bender, Lucas Fabianski of sorts. That would be it. I would be happy to bring in Fabianski for a season or 2, probably just 1 season actually, given his age. And then I think, look, I'm really happy with the 4 centre backs we have, but I feel as though with the recent squad list, with not seeing Issa Diop there whatsoever, I think that's a player we can definitely upgrade on. And I want someone to give Anderson a bit of a kick up the arse and compete with Joachim Anderson, and actually bring in a centre back, a right-sided centre back with a lot of quality, where Anderson's like, oh God, now I've got to really up my game. And suddenly that competitiveness in the back 4, because it seems as if when Anderson makes a mistake, he doesn't come out the team. Bassi came out the team the other day, I think, just to give him a rest. I think Jorge Cuenca is definitely a player we should keep. Absolutely fantastic player, and want to see more of him this season. But yeah, and then obviously a striker. I think we need a second striker to compete with Rodrigo and Rao. I'm obviously happy that Rao is staying. I'm obviously happy that he's going to be here again for a 3rd season. But I do think that we need maybe a different profile of striker, someone who likes to get in behind. We don't know what's going to happen with Callum Osman either. So, will he go to pre-season with Fulham and try and be that 3rd striker, or do you think we should dip into the market? So yeah, lots to do. There's lots to do, and that's just off the and that's taking away. That's not even considering that offers might come in for a Rodrigo Muniz, offers might come in for Anthony Robinson, offers might come in for Calvin Bassey, because these players have impressed. Bernd Leno, well, hopefully Leno stays, and that'd be fantastic. But yeah, lots to do this summer, and I think my one real die on the hill take is that King has to be a part of this. We cannot let another one slip. I mean, you look at Chris Donnell leaving yesterday, and okay, I get it, he's 21, and if he's not making any progress or looking like he's going to break into the first team, then I understand it. I think he'll have a great career elsewhere. But Josh is 18. He's played in the first team. Fabio Carvalho was 19 when he came through, and Josh King, I think, is now playing at Premier League level, whereas Fabio was basically playing Championship level, albeit 1 game against Southampton in the Prem, where he scored. I think he scored. Yeah. So lots to do. Keeping players in the club, making players happy. I think it's just vitally important we don't let Josh King slip through our fingers, and that's by giving him minutes next season, because he's good enough. If Silva likes him, if Silva's going to be here, then I'm very, very confident he's going to get those minutes. In terms of Martial Goddo, players like that, I think Martial should get a loan out again to the Championship. I think he'll do very, very well playing consistent Championship minutes. And then there's obviously loads of academy players that obviously can get loans and then will progress further forward next season as well. Joe, so much to do. And I think we were both at the AFC Wimbledon game on Monday. I went for a few beers afterwards and sort of was quite jolly and just went, I think my player of the season was Calvin Bassey, because I think it's a really weird one, but where you talk about the first half of the season where Iwobi was unbelievable player of the season, in-line player of the season. Same with Robinson. Everyone seemed to just sort of flatline a little bit. And actually, when the wash is done and you take out all the washing, you think of the clean clothes. I think that what came out this season when 38 games were finished, I was like, I think Calvin Bassey has been our player of the season. And someone replied saying, well, we didn't get many clean sheets, and he was second most player that gave away the errors leading to goals, or maybe errors leading to chances. I think it might have been goals. But I think in terms of his consistent performances, the way he's nullified loads and loads of threats on the pitch from opposition, and sort of he's almost like this sort of marauding centre back now who loves to get forward. He goes on these runs forward, he links up play, and he's so strong on the ball. Yes, he made an error against Ipswich Town when they scored. Yes, he made an error against Man United on the opening night, but they didn't score from that. They tried to walk the ball in and still missed. Calvin Bassey for me, but I can understand why people might say Iwobi, people might say Berger, people might say Lukic, but I feel like there's been no real, across the whole season, there's been no real standout where everyone's like, that's the guy. That's the guy who's player of the season. What about you?
Agree. Yeah, it's really tough. When I saw that tweet, I thought, okay, he's probably been the most consistent, because I don't think that he peaked as much as Robinson did, or Iwobi did, or Lukic did first half of the season, like you say.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, he also didn't dip like they did in form. So I'm inclined to agree with you, Jack, in terms of if I had to vote right now, I'd probably vote for Calvin Bassey when the club vote comes out. I would not be surprised if Iwobi won based on his first half of the season. Same with Robinson. I don't think Robinson dropped off quite as much as Iwobi, but I think that you could tell that he was struggling with his injury. And I think that Lukic has also got a great shout. I thought that Lukic had an unbelievable first half of the season where we were all thinking, oh my goodness, did we need Polinia? Like, it was that level, wasn't it? Everyone was having those conversations. I mean, that is in itself, and partly because of how good Berger was. I don't think there's anyone else that would really be put up for it, if I'm honest. I think it's out of those four players. So Robinson, Iwobi, Bassey, Lukic. And I think out of those right now, over the level of the whole season, I go Calvin Bassey. I think that what it does show is that the level of squad is not deep enough to sustain the type of football that we play. Especially
Marco likes a small squad.
He needs to stop liking it as much, or he needs to like it with better quality on the bench. I think that might be the bigger issue. I think it's like the squad size maybe is not so bad as long as the players that are coming off the bench are of a good enough quality, and they weren't when we got the injuries. Your point about Josh King is interesting, because I would love Josh King to get minutes next season. I think that would be great. I'm very conscious that Marco's only given him minutes when there was no longer anything else on the line, really.
I disagree.
But in terms of the Everton game onwards, because he wasn't in the team from back against Leicester, I think, until this run-in, despite all the injuries, that he brings him on when we go 3-1 down against Everton. And then he brings him on, obviously, against Brentford. Great.
When he could have brought on Pereira.
He could have brought on Pereira.
And we were losing the game.
Didn't. Yeah, but in terms of, there was no league implications, I should say. Obviously, you don't want to lose any game, and especially you don't want to lose against Brentford. And I like they brought him on. My concern really here is I'd love him to be involved, but is he going to give him enough minutes to make it more worthwhile that he stays versus going on loan to the Championship, for example? Because if he got a loan in the Championship and he played week in, week out, it's up for debate, because Premier League football is Premier League football. And he's training every week with the Premier League team, regardless of when he plays as well. But would it be more beneficial for him to get minutes? I think that's something that I'll have to think about this summer. Then again, you also want to think about the fact that he's not tied down long term. You've got to convince him to stay. Is he going to be more convinced to stay if he is getting those opportunities in the first team versus he's been given a loan? There's, I think, a few things to debate. But I was disappointed with Marco's use of him second half of the season. And that's not on King, that's on the manager. And I would have really loved to have seen him been involved more when we had that run of games prior to Everton, when we weren't performing and we were lacking any sort of movement in midfield. Yes, he's young, but I think he's proved that he can be a great option. And I would have loved to see more of him. But that is why my concern is that I felt like Silva didn't want to use him until there was nothing riding on it league-wise. And that does concern me a little bit.
It's a good point. I look at it a different way, and I go, with a few games left to go, this is a test of, is he good enough to play in this team, in this system, to be a part of this squad amongst these players in this division. And I think against Brentford, his cameo was exceptional.
It was
and I think that maybe that's proved that, coming on against Manchester City, playing against all these big players, Pep Guardiola probably having a look at you. The only issue I have is if he goes out on loan with 1 year left on his contract, he comes back and we're like, and then you have another fan base who fall in love with him. It's like Jay Stansfield situation a little bit. It's one of my biggest fears in football is having a player that's so good in your academy or so good as a young player at your club, being loaned out like a Jay Stansfield, and Birmingham absolutely fell for him head over heels to the point where they literally paid way over the odds for him on deadline day, just due to the fact that the fans were like, we have to get him. And look, the move has obviously worked out for him. But I would, if we loaned him out, it has to be sign a new contract and then loan him out. But it's difficult because the talk is that he's unhappy with the minutes he's got. I really hope that Silva has put an arm around his shoulder the last 2 weeks and said, look, you're going to feature these last few games. And if you're good enough, which I know that you are, you'll come to it with us for pre-season. You're going to be part of the match day squad for every single game. I would take him out of the under-21s and say, just don't play under-21s at all next season. Because we've got enough midfielders to fill that gap completely with like Dippy Diaz and lots of other players, and Seth Richard coming through as well. So I think it's all got to be first team football next season, and hopefully that's enough to sway him and go, yeah, I've got a pathway here. In fact, this is my pathway. Let's sign a new contract and let's seal the future. He's a Fulham fan, I hear, so it's obviously really tough, and I'm sentimental towards King more than everyone else because it's just because he's just a player who I think has got incredible talent, and I think that everyone else, every other fan is feeling that way as well. A few more questions for you before we end. So Harrison Reed, are you feeling that he should leave?
I think it's probably his time.
Right.
And despite what I tweeted a few months ago, like I want to make it clear, I don't dislike the guy at all. And he's been a great servant to the club. And I remember being so excited when we got him on a permanent after we got promoted to the Premier League. So there was a bit of doubt about that for a while. I don't think that he now offers what we need. And by that, I mean, I don't think that he is good enough as backup for our more defensive midfielders. And I think that's what we need. And we also need to look for the future in terms of, can we get someone a bit younger that can eventually take that spot for themselves? Otherwise, it's those sort of transfers that stop you having to rebuild every summer because you have players that are ready to then take that mantle on. We're in a position now where I don't want to lose Bassi, but if we lost Bassi, Cuenca would probably come straight in and start. That sort of situation is what I mean. It's the same at left back. I think we need a left back, like you said, potentially a younger left back to be the understudy to Robinson to prepare for one day when he goes. And ultimately, if we lost Sander Berger tomorrow, for example, and the player that is the backup for him right now basically is Harrison Reed, you would want to replace that player. And I think that's the way that we need to now look at this. We need to get someone that would challenge him instead. And that does pain me to say. I think he's been a great servant to the club. Again, been here for some wonderful, wonderful times and always been very consistent in terms of performance and application on the pitch. And very sad that the way his last game, if it was his last game, ended in terms of that injury after being subbed on against Villa. Very unlucky. But I think he's a player we need to improve. I think that our midfield is one of the things that's really let us down this season. And ultimately, we can't suddenly get all sentimental and think, Reed's been great and Pereira's been a great servant and whatever. We need to think, okay, can we do better than these players? And we can. And it's a cutthroat way of looking at it, but I want to see Fulham winning things. I want to see Fulham back in Europe. And ultimately, if you look at the teams around us, would any of them take these players as depth? I don't think they would. I think that's how we need to look at this.
I agree. I think the Harrison Reed situation is his cycle at the club has been phenomenal. Two promotions, scoring some really important goals for Fulham down the year. Didn't score all the time, but scored some good goals and against Villa, against Forest. I seem to remember. Yeah, 2 promotions under Parker, and then obviously a relegation, and then promotion under Silva, and then obviously the plan was Polinia, Pereira, Carvalho as our midfield for the first season back in the Premier League. It didn't work out that way because Carvalho obviously left. So then it had to be changed, and it was Reed, Polinia, Pereira, and it was a joy to watch. It was fantastic. We were unbelievable. That 3 in that first season, especially first half of the season, was just unbelievable. And look, I think last season as well, I think he may have scored in the penalty shootout against Everton. May have. I can't remember now, but
I can't remember.
I think he might have. But anyway, he
was
put in
meant to be the
shifts.
5th taker, wasn't he, against United this season? That's what everyone was saying. Yeah.
And look, this season's been difficult for him. I think, obviously, bringing in Berger and Lukic, but it does feel as if the cycle's come to an end. He won't be happy with the amount of minutes he's got. He won't be guaranteed any more minutes next season because of just the way the midfield has progressed. And yeah, just he'll go. He'll if he leaves the club this summer in seek of maybe a Championship move or Premier League move where he's going to get more minutes, I think everyone will give him the absolute best send off because he's been fantastic. You really strip it back, he's been absolutely phenomenal for Fulham. All those games in the Championship under Silva, all those games in the Premier League of the first season were probably the best 2 years we saw of Harrison Reed. So yeah, lots and lots of love for Harrison Reed. I think he's such a good player, and it's just come to the end of his cycle because of the way that, like I said, the midfield has changed a little bit, and the profile of player we're getting in, and like you say, the backup to Berger, like he's not starting over Berger, so it's a tough one. And 2 more questions. Andreas Pereira, interesting.
I think that the City game summed up Pereira in terms of great work ethic and does a lot of stuff right. But ultimately, when he's playing mostly as the more advanced midfielder, he's not good enough at scoring goals or at creating chances, if we're being honest. Again, I think that a lot of people said this on Twitter, and I think it's true, when we come to look back at Pereira in a few years' time after he's left the club, I think we'll think, wow, he did a really great job for us. In terms of when we came up, he was so good at providing set-piece threat. He always worked really hard. But there's been stuff bubbling for a while about him, agitating for a move elsewhere. We don't know how true it is. But I do think there's no smoke without fire. And I think there must be something going on. And ultimately, I think he's one of the easiest positions that we can upgrade in terms of quality. Work ethic is another thing. I think he works very hard. And I think that he was perfect, for example, that game against Chelsea. In that first half, he worked so hard and was the reason that we played so well. When he got tired and he had to come off, everything went downhill and we lost the game. But I do think that both Harrison Reed and Pereira will probably leave. And I think that, in all honesty, it's the right decision, both for us and for them. I think that Pereira will probably want to go back to Brazil, it seems. And Harrison Reed, I'm sure he can find some consistent minutes at bare minimum, high-level Championship. But I wouldn't be surprised if any of the promoted clubs took a look at him if he was available, especially Burnley are managed by Scott Parker, who we know is a massive fan.
Just finally, Sunderland join us in the Premier League next season. Good, because I didn't want Blades up.
Happy.
I just thought they would be too boring to have those 3 up. But Leeds, Burnley, Sunderland, a couple of trips to the northeast. Ooh, let's go.
Like it. Yeah, I was happy for Sunderland. It was shocking for most of that playoff final, weren't they? But they turned it on when it mattered. For nostalgia reasons, I like Sunderland back up as well. Same with you, Jack, growing up at the same sort of time.
Yeah.
Premier League, that they were never present when we were there. Really like it. Also, just good. I've got nothing against Sheffield United, but it is good and healthy for it not to always be the exact same teams. And I'm happy that it was Sunderland. It's going to be a big bridge for them to do in order to be good enough, but they've They're a big club. I'm sure that they've realised this is a big opportunity for them to try and get back for good. Let's see if they can do it.
The last time Sunderland visited Craven Cottage in the Premier League was a 4-1 win for Sunderland and a hat-trick for Adam Johnson. Since then, they've come down to play us in the FA Cup. I think they won 3-1 after Rodallega took the lead. And they also came down in a 1-1 draw where TC equalised, and then we went up to Stadium of Light and won the replay. There we have it. The review of the season's done. We didn't really go over goals and moments, but you can sort of work it out. It's always going to be Chelsea and Brentford, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much, Joe, for being here. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening and watching. And we'll be back sometime in the summer. And I'm sure there'll be the rumours will start churning away, and we can start talking about potential signings. Joe, thank you so much for being here.
Cheers, Jack. No, pleasure all season. Thanks everyone for watching, listening all season. See you in the transfer window.
Oh, absolutely. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be a busy summer. Lots to look forward to. But you know what Fulham are like. We could be back here in a month's time and nothing's happened. Let's just hope that Fulham get their skates on and get signing some players. Thank you so much for listening, watching, and come on, Fulham.